Yeah. Dear Father in heaven, we're so grateful that you allow us to come together as a group to reason through and discuss and try to understand the progression of Islam. We realize that it's important for us to understand what's coming, and we appreciate that you give us a warning ahead of time. We ask for you to be present with us, to open our hearts and our minds, to let go of any preconceived notions, and help us to truly connect the dots and understand the light you're trying to show us. Help us to take heart with this light, and help us to see how to apply it with this coming future. I pray that you will bless Sister Elaine and all the work she has done as she shares it with us this evening. I know that you have guided her in her studies, and what you're going to share through her today is what we will need to know. So we pray that we can all understand. We praise you, Lord. We thank you so much for being present with us and blessing all those that will be coming and joining us this evening. Thank you, Father. And in Yeshua's name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. Okay, open my door here. Shut Fergus out while we pray. We go back to the beginning. So tonight is we're going to get to probably 1831 to 33, but we're going to trace the history I almost put it in a separate file, but I decided to put it in this one. But we're going to trace the events that took place prior to, that led up to 1831. So anyway, so here we go. And the two 1831, this is only 1831 to 1833. This is the first 2 years, if you remember on that graph, and I think we'll have it in this, I think it's in this study. But from 1831 to 1833 is the first 2 years. It's called the First Syrian War, or First Egyptian-Turkey War. And then there was a 6-year break in between, and then it resumed again, 1839 to 41. And then I have a little bit of information here that I've been building for 2011 to, I don't think I meant for that to say 2013, but for the Syrian War that's currently going on, that I'm not yet finished with, but I'm not sure how far we'll get through this anyways tonight. So I'll still be working on that. Just trying to put all the events on a line. So yeah, here's the 2 years here that we're going to be looking at. But what we're going to look at is in between here that leads to here. All the various events that take place. So on August 22nd, 1799, Napoleon leaves Egypt. And so we went through last week, or last Sabbath, we went through all that history of him going down into Egypt to want to try to block and stop commerce and trade going back and forth from India to, for the British to India. And he goes down there to try to get control of the Mediterranean and perhaps annex. I know there was talk of annex. I don't think it's in the things that I've been finding, but there was histories before that were actually always talking about annexing Egypt. Anyway, so finally Napoleon is one that goes down there to do this, and they're enemies with Britain, and Britain has trade between them and India, and it's, I'm saying, as Parminder said, like their cash cow. So he wants to block that trade off. He also wants to go down there and explore to find a way to get down into India without having to go all the way down around the coast of Africa, the west coast of Africa, down underneath Africa, and then over to India. So he goes down there to look at, one of the things we looked at was the Canal of the Pharaohs, where the Pharaohs had actually initially started to dig a canal there, going into the Suez Canal, and I don't believe that was complete. But when he goes down there, he gets semi-control, but that's the history of Josiah Litch saying that he's the him of Daniel 11:40, and the king of the south, Egypt, which is a faction of Islam. The Mamelukes, I think we read that the other night. And he goes down there and lets the Muslims know, I'm not here to hurt you, I'm here to be with him. And so he wanted to be over control over Egypt. But they did push against him, and that's the Daniel 11:40, where the king of the south pushed against him, France, but they wound up in the end with Napoleon being somewhat over there, went in and conquered Cairo. Then he starts to he goes on a little bit of his expedition. Then he starts his work his way up through Syria, but he gets as far as there's something else that it's called that might be on here, but Acre, the town, I don't know if it's town of Acre, but anyway, so he gets to Acre, and that's where they come like a whirlwind against him, and he's defeated. The British actually helped Islam. So in looking at some of the things, if anybody read the teacher chat, some of the stuff that I was putting in there, some of it was help from Brother Itabo, but I was also listening to the IPR camp meeting presentations again in number 8 and 9, particularly probably number 9 is where I was picking up a lot of this. Is like, because when you listen to Elder Parmenter, I was just listening to every word of what he was saying in a way that's like, what is he trying to say to us? And I was just really listening to it intently, and I realized that because this was all kind of confusing to me at the start, is that the Ottoman Empire Egypt was part of the Ottoman Empire, but through things that had happened prior to 1798, Egypt had become, I may have the wrong words for it, but kind of standing alone. They were part of the Ottoman Empire, but they were supposed to be vassals, but they were becoming more powerful, and they were kind of standing alone, but still part of the Ottoman Empire. So they had like 2 different factions here they were all Muslim, but 2 different factions of Muslims. So I started to think about that, because according to Josiah Litch, the king of the south is Egypt, right? And the king of the north, he says, is Syria or Turkey, because Turkey was over Syria at the time. So here you have the king of the south is Islam, and the king of the north is also Islam. So I realized that what we have in our proxy war today is that the king of the north and the king of the south, you have the United States and Russia, but they're in proxy wars, and who are the ones that they are supporting? Russia is supporting one portion of Islam. I don't know if it's right to say portion, but because I don't know how many factions they are, but Russia is supporting the Shiites, and the United States is supporting the Sunnis. So by proxy, you have the king of the north and the king of the south as both Islam. Did that make sense? You guys listening?
We're listening, but the 2 of us got confused.
Okay, so I'll say it again.
We got stuck on, is Turkey part of the Ottoman Empire?
Yes.
Okay, it is.
Istanbul, and yeah, they are. I have to look at the map to get myself situated all the time. Huh?
And the Ottoman Empire is over India or Egypt.
Over Egypt. Over Egypt, yes.
Egypt, Syria.
And Syria,
and
yeah.
The only reason India is in this conversation is because Bonaparte was trying to block Britain from getting to it.
Yes.
For their finances. They're not really part of Islam or anything. They're just a means to an end, right?
As far as I know, I haven't gone into India a whole lot. I started to look a little bit at it, but I hadn't, because we're going to need to know. But I have some other thoughts on that. But I'll restate or try to restate what I was saying, because we do need to know about India, and we do need to know about the British. What I know in the time of Napoleon is that the British supported the Sultan, which is Turkey. And so they came in and helped be like the whirlwind to push back and conquer Napoleon. Napoleon went back to Egypt, and then he went back to France. So you have, in the time of 1798, you have two different, they're all Muslim or Islam, and two different factions going on there. Radical Islam, and I don't know what you would call the ones that are in Turkey. I don't know that part, if there was anything they were called. I just know that the radical ones were the Mamelukes, the ones in Egypt, and they were the ones that were ruling kind of autonomously from the Ottoman Empire. And so he goes down there, yes, to want to break off the commerce and trade, to cut the root off for British to squeeze on them financially, and he wants to get control of the Mediterranean. Remember, he was the one that was, I don't have the words in front of me, he was the one that was to conquer, he was a tool in the hand of God to conquer Europe and put down the papal power. And so, but to do that, he had to conquer Europe. So anyway, so your king of the north and your king of the south were both Islam. So when you go to us, we're looking at the king of the north and the king of the south being Islam by proxy. So the United States and Russia are representing two different factions of Islam. Why are they doing that? That's a question for anybody that wants to consider an answer. Why are they fighting as they are in the Middle East?
Well, it's for control. Oil, but
Oil.
Control.
Control the oil, yeah.
Yeah.
Control the oil. So,
Greed.
Yeah, so to cut off, and so I think it's safe I don't have that, I have it right here, but I don't have it drawn out or haven't, don't have it all figured out. But I think that's the connection with India. If there's a literal connection with India today, I don't know. But I think that's the connection by parable anyways, it would seem, and we need to continue to study it out, is that you have them both wanting control over the Middle East for the oil. And as I think we talked about on Sabbath, that Russia wanted warm water ports as well. And so, so that would be a connection, 1989 in 1798 when it comes to India. But what we have is by proxy, the king of the north and the king of the south are both representing Islam. So did that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
First we have the Ottoman Empire, and the Mamelukes are the radical Islam, and that's one of the kings. That's the king of the north or the king of the south?
The Mamelukes are the king of the south. They're in Egypt.
Okay.
And they're the ones that are ruling over Egypt.
Okay. And the other one is
The Sultan.
the Sultan.
The Sultan. I don't know enough about it as of yet. I've been trying to really get to know who these guys are. Really trying to get to know who these guys are. Because what went on here is what brought us to here. And we know that we have Russia involved, we have the United States involved, we have different factions of Islam involved, we have the oil involved, right? And so these actions here, we know what brought about Al-Qaeda, brought us to Al-Qaeda, brought us to Zarqawi, brought us to al-Baghdadi, that brought us then to, I think al-Baghdadi was in here somewhere. But I'm pretty sure it was Zarqawi that I was in the video that I was watching yesterday. Maybe somebody else knows this better than I do, but I'm pretty sure it was Zarqawi, but I think I remember he was killed in 2005. So I couldn't remember if it was him or Baghdadi, because what it said was that, I think it was Zarqawi. He was killing, maybe if somebody knows this answer, let me know. He was killing their own people. He was killing Muslims. And that was something that bin Laden that wasn't what they were about killing your own Muslim brothers and sisters. And it was war on the West, not with your Muslims. So they just...
The last guy you're saying, what's his name again?
al-Baghdadi.
The other one after that.
Zarqawi.
Yeah, is he the one who made himself the caliphate?
That was al-Baghdadi.
That was al-Baghdadi.
Yeah, he followed Zarqawi.
Okay.
And that's the history that I've only been getting glimpses of. I got the names, I think, right, finally, but don't have that's the details that I haven't been able to work on yet. And that's this history in here leading up to here. But I'm pretty sure it was with Zarqawi where it said when they started killing Muslims, that started to grow anger and animosity within the Middle East that played a role in sparking to the civil wars. So to the Civil War. That's just a little piece that I picked up, but that's about all I picked up on that part so far. So, but I think we're making a little bit of progress, seeing the connection with India and trade with British, and then the oil here and wanting to control the Middle East. There were some interesting articles, and I think I attached them all in the email. I still need to go, I read them, but I wasn't reading them while putting together the study. So there was pieces that I know that are going to be really, really useful. And I need to go through them again in looking back at Russia and what they were doing back in this history before here. Because, in 1979 to 89, you have the Afghanistan War. And what Brother Italo was saying, and I had a question on it. So, but 1979 to 1989 was the Afghanistan War. And I think we all remember that it was Russia retreated and left. Right? And so that also relates to France and Napoleon retreating and leaving, going back home. He was a whirlwind comes against him and he leaves. So so there's that. The question I had was because it's 79 to 89, not after 1989. So what Brother Itabo said is because of parable teaching, we can do that. And so I don't know, we'll have to check that out, just to be on the safe side. But anyway, so I don't know if that was confusing to you guys, but here you have the king of the south, Egypt, pushes at France, and then the king of the north comes like a whirlwind against France. So down here, you would have to have the same issues going on. The king of the south pushing against him. And here's where it's another one that's going to be confusing if you're taking notes, is that the king of the south, this was the Soviet Union here before the Soviet Union fell. So if I followed what I was understanding from Brother Itabo, it's something that he had said to me a few weeks ago, and I know I mentioned him saying something a few weeks ago, but I didn't understand it and it kind of threw me off. Because it left you asking who the him is. If you have the king of the north and the king of the south, well, who's the him? Because I'm thinking the king of the north and the king of the south is got to be Russia. I wasn't thinking about the connection through proxy and being Islam, but the king of the north and the king of the south is Russia and the United States. Who is the him? But he places the him as the Soviet Union here. So Russia plays both the role of Russia, the king of the south, and Islam, if that's not confusing. So, okay, so let's read the history now that I put all that confusion out there. Things to plant in your mind. Hopefully you're taking notes because you can go back and study these things too. So the Battle of Heliopolis was a French victory by the Army de Orient under General Kleber over the Ottoman army at Heliopolis on March 20th, 1800. Kleber, Napoleon left in 1799, he left Kleber in charge. Kleber engaged in negotiations with both the British and the Ottomans, and he was left in Egypt here with the aim of honorably evacuating the remains of the French force from Egypt to take part in operations in Europe. So Kleber's working on going back and taking the army back to Europe. An accord, the Convention of El Arish, was concluded on the 23rd of January, 1800, allowing such a return to France. But it proved impossible to apply due to internal dissensions among the British and the dithering of the Sultan. And so the conflict in Egypt restarted. So now there's a battle that's going on again. Napoleon's already gone, and there's a battle that's going on again with Kleber. And Kleber was betrayed by the British, Admiral Keith, who did not respect the El Arish Convention. Kleber restarted hostilities, for he refused to surrender. So Kleber is the one that Napoleon left in charge. The hostilities begin again because he refused to surrender. The British and the Ottomans believed the Army de Orient was now too weak to resist them. And so Yusuf Pasha, he would be the leader at the time in Egypt, marched on Cairo, where the local population obeyed his call to rise up. Kleber led the outnumbered French troops to attack the Ottoman army at Heliopolis, decisively winning the battle and enabling them to re-enter Cairo and bring an end to the revolt. So Napoleon had taken Cairo previously. There was a revolt. I think there was a revolt before this one, and then this is the next revolt, and we might see that later if I might be wrong, but there was a revolt. But Kleber winds up taking back Cairo, and he was outnumbered, but still won Cairo back. And now Kleber's successor, Abdallah Jacques Monod, a French officer and former nobleman who had turned Muslim, he actually married a Muslim woman, if I remember right, was determined to maintain the occupation and administered at first a tolerably settled country. Although he lacked the prestige of his two predecessors, Napoleon and Kleber, in 1801, a threefold invasion of Egypt began. So he's the successor, he's in Egypt, they're ruling, they've got control of Cairo. Now there's going to be a threefold attack on Egypt. The British troops landed at Abu Qir in March, while the Ottomans advanced from Syria. Shortly afterward, British Indian forces were landed at Khazar on the Red Sea coast. The French garrison in Cairo capitulated in June, and Monod himself at Alexandria in September. So the French army capitulated, and their Cairo was now back in the hands of Egypt. The brief episode of the French occupation was to be significant for Egypt in several ways. So this is that brief period of time, Napoleon comes in, they wind up occupying Egypt. The arrival of the European army, accompanied by scholars and scientists, appropriately inaugurated the impact of the West, which was to be felt increasingly afterward. Egypt, insulated for centuries by the Mamluk and Ottoman sultanates, was no longer immune from European influence. It had become an object of the contending policies of France and Britain, a part of the Eastern question. And I got some notes on the Eastern question. If anybody remembers that coming up in their studies, having people who was part of a conspiracy theory when it came to trying to say that Uriah Smith was right, and they were all involved in the Eastern Question, and it was all false and untrue. So I'll explain in a minute what the Eastern Question is. Napoleon's savants had little success in interpreting Western culture to the traditionalist ulama of Cairo. Their achievement was rather to unveil Egypt to Europe. They uncovered the celebrated Rosetta Stone, which held a trilingual inscription, making it impossible to decipher hieroglyphs, and which thus laid the foundation, making it possible, not impossible, laid the foundation of modern Egyptology. Their reports and monographs were collected in the monumental Description de l'Egypte, or Description of Egypt, which was published in parts from 1809 to 1828 in Paris. So here's the Eastern Question in diplomatic history. It refers to the strategic competition and political considerations of the European great powers in light of the political and economic instability in the Ottoman Empire from the late 18th century to early 20th century. Characterized as the sick man of Europe, and I have a little note down here, the sick man of Europe is a label given to a European country experiencing a time of economic difficulty or impoverishment. The term was used in the mid-19th century to describe the Ottoman Empire. So the sick man of Europe was the Ottoman Empire. So characterized as the Ottoman Empire, sick man of Europe, the relative weakening of the empire's military strength in the second half of the 18th century threatened to undermine the fragile balance of power system largely shaped by the concert of Europe. The Eastern Question encompassed myriad interrelated elements: Ottoman military defeats, Ottoman institutional insolvency, the ongoing Ottoman political and economic modernization program, the rise of ethno-religious nationalism in its provinces, and great power rivalries. While there is no specific date on which the Eastern Question began, the Russo-Turkish War, 1828-29, brought the issue to the imminent. The European powers engaged in a power struggle to safeguard their military, strategic, and commercial interests in the Ottoman domains. Imperial Russia stood to benefit from the decline of the Ottoman Empire. On the other hand, Austria-Hungary and Great Britain deemed the preservation of the empire to be in their best interest. The Eastern Question was put to rest after World War I, one of the outcomes of which was the collapse and division of the Ottoman holdings. So the first phase of the concert of Europe, known as the Congress system or Vienna system after the Congress of Vienna, was dominated by the five great powers of Europe: Austria, France, Prussia, Russia, and the United Kingdom. So this concert of Europe was these five powers here. The more conservative members of the concert of Europe were also members of the Holy Alliance, used this system to oppose revolutionary movements, weaken the forces of nationalism, and uphold the balance of power. So that was a lot of information. Any questions?
No questions.
So one of more immediate consequence for Egypt was the effect of the French occupation on internal politics. The Mamluk ascendancy was fatally weakened. Murad Bey, this Bey was a name like a title, like they weren't pharaohs, but it was a title. So they were named Beys, it was a title. So Murad Bey, who had made his peace with the French, died shortly before their capitulation in 1801. And Ibrahim Bey, who returned to Egypt with the Ottomans, had henceforward little power. The new Mamluk leaders, Uthman Bey, al-Bardisi, died in 1806, and Muhammad Bey al-Alfi died in 1807. Former retainers of Murad headed rival factions and had in any case to reckon with the British Ottoman occupation forces. In March 1803, the British troops were evacuated in accordance with the Treaty of Amiens, and that was March 27, 1802, but the Ottomans, determined to reassert their control over Egypt, remained, establishing their power through a viceroy and an occupying army. in which the most effective fighting force was an Albanian contingent. The Albanians, however, acted as an independent party, and in May 1803 mutinied and installed their leader as acting viceroy. This is all what's going on in Egypt, to the power struggle that's going on in Egypt. When he was assassinated shortly afterward, the command of the Albanians passed to his lieutenant, Muhammad Ali, which reigned from 1805 to 1849, who during the ensuing 2 years cautiously strengthened his own position at the expense of both the Mamelukes and the Ottomans. So now we're going to look at Muhammad Ali and who he is. So let's see, during the ensuing 2 years, cautiously strengthened his own position at the expense of the Mamelukes and the Ottomans. So Muhammad Ali Pasha, at the height of his rule, controlled Lower Egypt, Upper Egypt, Sudan, and parts of Arabia and the entire Levant. Though not a modern nationalist, he is regarded as the founder of modern Egypt. He was a military commander in the Albanian Ottoman force sent to recover Egypt from French occupation under Napoleon. Following Napoleon's withdrawal, Muhammad Ali rose to power through a series of political maneuvers. And in 1805, he was named Wali, or Viceroy, of Egypt, and then gained the rank of Pasha. He also initiated a violent purge of the Mamelukes, consolidating his rule and permanently ending the Mameluke hold over Egypt. His attempt at suppressing the Greek rebellion failed decisively, and we're going to go through the Greek rebellion, failed decisively, however, in intervention by the European powers at Navarino. In 1831, Muhammad Ali waged war against the Sultan, and that's the war we're going to look at, capturing Syria, crossing into Anatolia, and directly threatening Constantinople. But Western powers, this is what brought the Western powers in, threatened him to retreat. He did the same invasion against the Ottoman Empire in 1840, and that's the Second Syrian War, when he defeated again the Ottomans and had a free way to capture Istanbul. Faced with another European intervention, this is the great powers, he accepted a brokered peace in 1842 and withdrew from the Levant. In return, he and his descendants were granted hereditary rule over Egypt and Sudan. The dynasty he established would rule Egypt until the Revolution of 1952. So that was a lot of information again too. This is the Pasha that is ruling in Egypt during the Syrian War that we're going to eventually get to in this study, from 1831 to 1841. And it was all over Syria. The Ottomans against him for control of Syria. And he also got rid of the Mamluk hold over Egypt. So it's his actions that we want to try to understand, his actions that he did, and then the Sultan's action as well, that brought them to go to war. And it involves bringing in the Western powers as well. And all of this leads to, is history that leads to the prediction by a Josiah Litch that August 11th, 1840, that the Ottoman Empire would collapse. And it was given into the hands of the Christians. So those Christian powers, those great powers that interceded and helped, are the ones that wind up taking over the Ottoman, or suppressing the Ottoman Empire, when the Ottoman Empire surrenders to them and having them help them with their battle. So, okay, so this is the Sultan that is over the Ottoman Empire at the time. So if you were picturing it, you have your Sultan, and then you have your other little territories, and the Pasha was over Egypt. But the Sultan, if I understand correctly, is over everything. And anybody that, if I say anything amiss that somebody knows is wrong, please correct me, but that's the way I understand it, is that the Sultan is over the entire Ottoman Empire, and then he has viceroys or vassals ruling under him. And that's what was going on with Egypt. But Egypt had gotten strong enough to go wanting to be autonomous and wanting more land. So this is the Sultan that, that ruled during this time period. So Muhammad II had to deal with multiple issues inherited from generations past. These issues lasted all through his reign. Shortly, the Eastern question with Russia, England, and France, and military problems arising from mutinous janissaries and factious ulemas. I think this was a religious faction, and I didn't include that one in here to look it up, but I'm pretty sure it was religious, but I might be wrong. He also faced numerous internal conflicts with the Egyptians, the Wahhabis, Serbians, Albanians, Greeks, and Syrians, and had administrative problems from rebellious pashas. And that's what Egypt, he's the pasha of Egypt. So he has administrative problems from rebellious pashas who would fain have founded new kingdoms on the ruin of House of Osman, or the Ottoman Empire. So they would have no problem putting him down for their own selves. Muhammad understood the growing problems of the state and the approaching overthrow of the monarchy, and began to deal with the problems as he saw them. For example, he closed the court of confiscations and took away much of the power of the pashas. He personally set an example of reform by regularly attending the divan, or state council. We went through that on Sabbath and I didn't know what it was. It's the state council. The practice of the sultans avoiding the divan had been introduced 2 centuries prior, during the reign of Suleiman I, and was considered to be one of the causes of the decline of the empire. So a couple centuries before, they stopped attending the state councils, and it said that that plays a role in the decline of the Ottoman Empire. So military expansion, and I do have some things up here, and we're starting to build it up a little bit. But you have the Muhammad Ali Pasha of Egypt, 1808. You now have Muhammad II, the Sultan that's ruling at this time, and he rules all the way to 1839. And he, what did it say? 1849, I think it said, for a very long time. So in Arabia, the domination of Islam's holy cities, Mecca and Medina, by puritanical Wahhabi Muslims was a serious embarrassment to the Ottoman Sultan, who was the titular overlord of the Arabian territory of the Hijaz. This is the Hijaz here, and you've got Mecca and Medina here. Whoops, sorry. You've got Mecca and Medina here. And it's, let's see. In Arabia, the domination of Islam's holy cities, Mecca and Medina, by puritanical Wahhabis, so you have Wahhabis here, was a serious embarrassment to the Sultan. Okay, he was overlord of the Arabian territory of the Hijaz and the leading Muslim sovereign. At the invitation of Sultan Muhammad II, which reigned from 1808 to 1839, Muhammad Ali, that's the Pasha, sent an expedition to Arabia that between 1811 and 1813 expelled the Wahhabis from the Hijaz. So the Pasha expels the Wahhabis from the Hijaz. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but he was sent by the Sultan to go do this. So you have the Pasha who's sent by the Sultan that's over the Ottoman Empire to come and expel the Wahhabis. The Wahhabis were puritanical, and I think that would be the correct word if I've been understanding correctly now. Puritanical, they're radical in their beliefs of extremism, with extreme strictness in all that they do, and coming down to chopping people's hands off for stealing and that type of stuff. So, so they're an embarrassment to the Sultan, and he sends the Pasha to go remove them from this area here. Let's see. In a further campaign, 1816 to 1818, Ibrahim Pasha, which is Muhammad Ali's son, Ibrahim Pasha, the viceroy's eldest son, defeated the Wahhabis in their homeland of Najd, is that how you say that? And that's here. So this is the homeland of the Wahhabis. And Muhammad Ali's son, Ibrahim Pasha, defeats the Wahhabis in their homeland and brought Central Arabia within control, within Egyptian control. So Central Arabia is now within Egyptian control. In 1820 to 21, Muhammad Ali sent an expedition up the Nile River, and that would be in here, up the Nile River, and conquered much of what is now the northern portion of Sudan, and that would be in here. You got the Nile River, so Muhammad Ali, the Pasha, sends an expedition up the Nile River and conquers much of what is the northern portion of Sudan. So here's your Egyptian border here, but they're going to have control over here of northern Sudan. By so doing, he made himself master of one of the principal channels of the slave trade. So this makes the Pasha over the African slave trade, and began an African empire that was to be expanded under his successors. And maybe somebody else, this was before 1798. When did the British stop slavery? At least in the form of which we knew it here in the US. Anybody remember? No, okay.
What was the question again?
What?
With the question Elaine just asked.
Oh,
What year was what?
Did the British stop slavery? I'm pretty sure it was before 1798. I want to say it was before 1798 from some other studies that we're looking at.
Okay.
Huh?
Okay, I was just wondering what you said. What day? Okay.
Yeah, I'm just having trouble keeping it all straight and remembering it all. So the Pasha makes himself master of one of the principal channels of slave trade and began an African empire that was to be expanded under his successors. So I thought that was interesting because this puts this Egypt Pasha, Muhammad Ali, in charge or master of the slave trade. And where were the slaves going from him? So there's money for him in that, if I understand correctly, because he's the slave trade was economical for them. So you've got the Pasha that comes over here and expels the Wahhabis out of here. His son then defeats the Wahhabis in their homeland, and then the Pasha goes and takes part of northern Sudan and opens up the slave trade, becomes the master there. Slave trade.
It was 1833.
1833? Okay.
Slavery, there was the Slavery Abolition Act.
Yeah, okay.
The British History Act of Parliament that abolished slavery in most British colonies, freeing more than 800,000 enslaved Africans in the Caribbean and South Africa, as well as a small number in Canada.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. For some reason or other, I had it in my head that it was earlier than that. So then he was still trading slaves up with British then, so being able to, I mean, there's money in that, so it helped him financially. Okay, so we're going to continue on and see some of the other battles, and keep in mind what we're trying to understand is what of these events are going to be significant when we line it up with the events of 1989 and going forward until you get to the Syrian War. So that's what we're trying to look at, and that's the history that I haven't got put together yet. But that's what we want to try to find out is, and we want to understand these events because these events are going to be parables to events on our line. Okay, so the next thing up is the Serbs in 1810s. In 1804, here, the Serbian Revolution against Ottoman rule erupted in the Balkans, running in parallel with the Napoleonic invasion. By 1817, when the revolution ended, Serbia was raised to the status of self-governing monarchy under nominal Ottoman don't know what that word is, suzerainty. In 1821, the first Hellenic Republic became the first Balkan country to achieve its independence from the Ottoman Empire. It was officially recognized by the Porte. If everybody remembers the Porte, that was the gate in the Ottoman Empire, kind of like a gate of judgment, a gate of entry, in 1829, after the end of the Greek War of Independence. So in 1821, you have the first Balkan country gains independence from the Ottoman Empire. And so the Serbian Revolution, you have the Serbia, Principality of Serbia, and supported by the Russian Empire against the Ottoman Empire. And they wind up the first Balkan country to gain its independence from the Ottoman Empire. So this is and remember back what it was saying, that when the Sultan stopped attending the Divan, which was the, what did it say, State Council? That State Council? I think that's what it said. When they stopped attending that this was known or said to have been the decline of the Ottoman Empire. So here they have all this territory. Now they lose the Balkan country, and it's the first Balkan country to gain independence from the Ottoman Empire. I think I might have some maps in here, not of this one, but of the whole empire. I don't remember if I do or not. But this one is particular. Now we're going into the Greek War of Independence.
I did find an earlier date on that British one, because you were thinking that there was an earlier one.
Uh-huh.
So there was a Slave Trade Act of 1807, but this only officially abolished the slave trade. It didn't abolish slavery. That makes sense. So although it says that although it did not abolish the practice of slavery, it did encourage British action to press other nation states to abolish their own slave trades. And that was in 1807.
So kind of like a progressive thing to, like
in our country, in the United States, they outlawed bringing slaves in from other countries, but it didn't abolish slavery in the country, right? It's the same thing, kind of.
Yeah,
right?
Same thing. That's what I was thinking as you said that. So now we're going to go into the Greek War of Independence. We've gone here where you have Muhammad Ali, the Pasha of Egypt, is put in place after struggles here for power. A vacuum left when Napoleon left, and they had several viceroys to come in, and then Muhammad Ali becomes the viceroy, and then the Sultan actually gives him the title Pasha, the Pasha of Egypt. And then in 1808 is when you have Muhammad II, which is, these two are going to rule all the way through. I think he goes further though. He goes to 1839. He goes to 1840 something, 49, 42, something like that. So they're the ones that are going to be here through this whole line. Then you have the 1811, 1813, the Pasha expels Wahhabis from Hijaz. You have 1816 to 18, the Ibrahim Pasha, that's his Muhammad Ali's son, defeats the Wahhabis in their own territory. Central Arabia now becomes under the control of Egyptian control. 1820 to 21, the Pasha conquers North Sudan and he becomes the master of slave trade. And in 1823, I think it was, 1821 in here. It is supposed to be 1821. The first Balkan country gains independence from the Ottoman Empire. So now we're going to see these next steps here that go into becoming the Greek War of Independence, which is 1821 to 1832. After the outbreak of the Greek insurrection against Ottoman rule, Muhammad Ali, at Muhammad's request, this is the Pasha of Egypt, at the Sultan's request, suppressed the Cretan revolt in 1822. So he suppressed this Cretan revolt at the request of the Sultan. So follow this along because he's doing things for the Sultan. Because it was the Sultan that sent him down to expel the Wahhabis as well. So if you're following through the line of things, he's doing things. They're all part of the Ottoman Empire. but he's doing things to establish himself here as well. But he's doing things at the command of the Sultan. In 1825, the Sultan again called Muhammad Ali to suppress a local uprising, this time a nationalist revolution by the Greek Christians. He was promised rule over Crete, Cyprus, and the Morea, the modern Peloponnese, for his services. So the Sultan is now calling him to suppress an uprising because the Greek Christians are starting to rise up. Let's see here. And so in exchange, he's promised to be able to rule over Crete, Cyprus, and the Morea, the Peloponnese, for his services. His son, Ibrahim Pasha, won quick victories at the head of a conscript army, that's a draft army that they were drafted in, and controlled nearly the entire Peloponnesian Peninsula within 10 months of his arrival in February 1825. The Greeks continued guerrilla operations, however, and by September 1827, public opinion in Russia, Britain, and France forced the great powers to intervene in favor of the Greeks. So you've got these great powers that are now going to intervene and help the Greeks against the Ottoman Empire, because the Greek War of Independence, they want to be independent and their own state, their own nation, independent of the Ottoman Empire. The joint British, Russian, French fleet destroyed Muhammad Ali's fleet that October at the Battle of Navarino, and Ibrahim's forces were expelled from the Morea a year later, following the arrival of the French expeditionary force and a settlement negotiated by the European powers. Once Ibrahim and his forces returned from Greece, preparations to wrest control of Syria began in earnest. So this was the Battle of Navarino, and it was 1827. And it was the destruction of Ottoman and Egyptian fleet. And remember that the Pasha was called to go in there and help, and he's being promised rewards, territory for his services. So once Ibrahim and his forces returned from Greece, preparations to wrest control of Syria began in earnest. So Ibrahim, remember, is the Pasha of Egypt's son, and they want to get Syria from the Ottoman Empire. They want to have control of Syria. The Greek struggle for independence won considerable popular support in Britain and France. Russia was traditionally hostile to Turkey and sympathetic to its Orthodox core religionists in Greece. Faced with the prospect of a Greek defeat and reports of massacres of Greek population, the Allied powers each sent a naval squadron to back up their calls for an armistice. So in the Greek War of Independence, these are who the Greeks are supported by: the United Kingdom, the Romanian revolutionaries, France and Russia, and the Ottoman Empire. You have Egypt, Algeria, Tripolitania, and Tunis. Greece came under Ottoman rule in the 15th century, in the decades before and after the fall of Constantinople. 1453, right? 1453. During the following centuries, there were sporadic but unsuccessful Greek uprisings against Ottoman rule. In 1814, a secret organization called Feliki Ateria, or Society of Friends, was founded with the aim of liberating Greece, encouraged by a revolutionary fervor gripping Europe in that period. And I highlighted that because that was one thing that caught my attention when it comes to Arab Spring, because I was looking at Arab Spring a while back and then recently. But the Syrian War, if I understood correctly, there was a spirit of revolution, and trying to think of, there's another way that this is worded in this same history. It was a spirit of revolutionary spirit that had grown from back from the French Revolution. But you also have in the Middle East this trying to spread democracy and this spirit of revolution for freedom and independence over this firm Islamic religious rule. So there were other nations that were having these revolutions. Tanzania is I think it's Tunisia. I think it's Tunisia, and Egypt had quick revolutions and won, and that's what led to then the revolution in the civil war in Syria. So it's encouraged by a revolutionary fervor that's gripping Europe. And if you remember the story of the study of revolutions, there were revolutions that took place. The French Revolution kind of seemed to kick a lot of it off. Then you had the Russian Revolution, the German Revolution, and I don't remember all the other ones. You have all these revolutions. And so you have the same thing in this history that also took place in the Middle East in our line that was sparking the revolutionary spirit. So the Society of Friends planned to launch revolts in the Peloponnese, the Danubian principalities, and Constantinople itself. The insurrection was planned for the 25th of March, 1821, on the Julian calendar, the Orthodox Christian Feast of Annunciation. However, the plans of the Society of Friends were discovered by Ottoman authorities, forcing the revolution to start earlier. The first revolt began on the 6th of March, or 21st February, depending on what calendar you're looking at, in the Danubian principalities, but it was soon put down by the Ottomans. The events in the north urged the Greeks in the Peloponnese, Morea, into action on the 17th of March. The Maniots were first to declare war. In September 1821, the Greeks, under the leadership of Theodoros Kolokotronis, captured Tripolista. Revolts in Crete, Macedonia, and central Greece broke out, but were eventually suppressed. Meanwhile, makeshift Greek fleets achieved success against the Ottoman Navy and the Aegean Sea and prevented Ottoman reinforcements from arriving by sea. Any comments as we go through this? Questions? So where are we at on our line as I'm looking at this? Not our line in our time, but where are we at on the line here in the history that we're looking at? Just to review and see who's...
I still have a hard time putting things on a line.
It's a whole lot. We're in the Greek War of Independence, 1821 to 1832. And we'll review the line a couple of times as we go through, but we're in this period here of the Greek War. Wanting to fight, they're fighting for their independence away from the Ottoman Empire.
I did notice that Arab Spring, it lasted for 2 years.
Arab Spring?
Yeah.
Yeah, and that was, Arab Spring, if I understood correctly, was also 2011, but it was part of what kicked off the Syrian Civil War. That same revolutionary spirit. And we'll see that when we get through, because I have some of that in these notes once we get through this history. So tensions soon developed among different Greek factions, leading to two consecutive civil wars. The Ottoman Sultan called in his vassal Muhammad Ali of Egypt, who agreed to send his son Ibrahim Pasha to Greece with an army to suppress the revolt in return for territorial gains. This is basically just restating some of what we just read, the same time period. So Ibrahim goes in, and that's the Battle of Navarino, I believe. Ibrahim landed in the Peloponnese in February 1825 and brought most of the peninsula under Egyptian control by the end of the year. The town of Missolonghi fell in April 1826 after a year-long siege by the Turks. Despite a failed invasion of Mani, Athens also fell, and the revolution looked all but lost. So they're not doing that well. This is what actually brings the great powers of Europe in, and it's those great powers that the Ottoman Empire then, I don't want to say, maybe I'm going to say this wrong, but I'm still trying to understand it all. It's not that they surrender, but they do accept help, which basically gives power over too. So it breaks them down under the powers of the Christian nations. So it's the result, it's the work of what Ibrahim does, the Muhammad Ali, the Pasha of Egypt's son, does, in where he is making a great headway in this against the Greeks. That at that point, the great powers, Russia, Britain, and France, decided to intervene, sending their naval squadrons to Greece in 1827. Following news that the combined Ottoman-Egyptian fleet was going to attack the island of Hydra, the Allied European fleets intercepted the Ottoman navy at Navarino. After a tense week-long standoff, the Battle of Navarino led to the destruction of the Ottoman-Egyptian fleet and turned the tide in favor of the revolutionaries, of the Greeks. And it's really interesting because it's the great powers that actually go in and help Ottomans against Egypt later. Okay, so in favor of the revolution. Okay, in 1828, the Egyptian army withdrew under pressure of a French expeditionary force. The Ottoman garrisons in the Peloponnese surrendered, and the Greek revolutionaries proceeded to retake central Greece. Russia invaded the Ottoman Empire and forced it to accept Greek autonomy in the Treaty of Adrianople in 1829. After 9 years of war, Greece was finally recognized as an independent state under the London Protocol of February 1830. Further negotiations in 1832 led to the London Conference and the Treaty of Constantinople. These defined the final borders of the new state and established Prince Otto of Bavaria as the first king of Greece. So Greece wins the Greek War of Independence. They're now separate from the Ottoman Empire. And I don't know who else who, but those are the things that we want to try to continue to dig into and understanding using methodology, using parables, as we put both the lines together and compare and contrast the events. And we're all going to need much prayer. And we need prayer for the movement to have this light on Islam that is needed. Okay, so the next is, before we get to the 1831 to 1833 Syrian War, this is the next event on our line, the auspicious incident, 1826. Muhammad II's, that's the Sultan, most notable achievements include the abolition of the Janissary court.
I was just going to ask that.
Did I say that word right?
Yeah.
Janissary?
Janissary. Janissary court.
Okay. So in
Yeah.
1826, the establishment of a modern Ottoman army and the preparation for the Tanzimat reforms in 1839. So he wanted to modernize his army. By 1826, the Sultan was ready to move against the Janissary in favor of a more modern military. Muhammad II incited them to revolt on purpose, describing it as the Sultan's coup against the Janissaries. The Sultan informed them through a fatwa that he was forming a new army organized and trained along modern European lines. As predicted, they mutinied, advancing on the Sultan's palace. In the ensuing fight, the Janissary barracks were set in flames by artillery fire, resulting in 4,000 Janissary fatalities. The survivors were either exiled or executed, and their possessions were confiscated by the Sultan. This event is now called the auspicious incident. The last of these Janissaries were then put to death by decapitation in what was later called the Blood Tower of Thessalonica. These marked the beginning of the modernization and had immediate effects, such as introducing European-style clothing, architecture, legislation, institutional organization, and land reform. So just kind of having some thoughts as, because that's probably one of our significant events in the Middle East to find what it is in the parable prior to the Syrian War. And it might have to do, that's why some of this I believe, and I'm not good at seeing this, you guys, but some of it might have to do with Zarqawi and al-Baghdadi and the work that they were doing. So the Janissaries were first created by the Ottoman sultans in the late 14th century and were employed as household troops. The Janissary Corps originally consisted of Christian children taken from their homes at a young age who were converted to Islam and given a strict military education. During the 15th and 16th centuries, they were recognized as one of the best trained and most effective units in Europe. They became known for their discipline, morale, and professionalism. They were paid regularly and were expected to be ready to enter battle at any time. So if I understood that correctly, being paid regularly, they had a regular salary, but maybe they weren't always at work, but they get paid. That's a standing army, isn't it? However, by the early 17th century, the Janissary Corps had ceased to function as an elite military force and had become a privileged hereditary class, and their exemption from paying taxes made them highly unfavorable in the eyes of the rest of the population. The number of Janissaries grew from 20,000 in 1575 and about 250 years later to 135,000 in 1826. So they were getting regular pay and they also don't pay taxes, and they're no longer even functioning as an elite military force. Many were not soldiers, but still collected pay from the Turkish state as dictated by the Corps. The Corps held an effective veto over the government, contributing to the steady decline of the Ottoman Empire. Any sultan who tried to diminish its status or power was immediately either killed or deposed. As opportunities and power continued to rise within this military unit, Turks began enrolling their own children, which then ultimately replaced the original intention of forcibly recruiting boys from Christian families. As corruption continued, the Janissary Corps began to undermine the Ottoman Empire. Over time, it became clear that for the Ottoman Empire to restore its position as a major power in Europe, it needed to replace the Janissary Corps with a modern army. And our last war here on the line before we get to the Syrian War, the Russo-Turkish War, 1828 to 1829, did not give him time to organize a new army, and the Sultan was forced to use these young and undisciplined recruits in the fight against the veterans of the Tsar. Is that Tsar? Is that Tsar? Is that how you say that one? It's a different spelling. Looking for some of my people that understand this stuff.
Yeah.
Tazar.
Yeah, okay.
Tazar.
Tazar?
Yeah.
Different. So there, is it like a czar, it's still a ruler, is that correct? Or is it, what is the Tazar? I didn't look that one up.
Pronunciation looks like Tazar, but yeah, I'm not sure on that question though.
Okay. Another one for me to look up. I bet that's what I've been trying to do when I come across stuff, is look them up and include them in when I could, but I didn't include them all. It helps me to better understand it as I keep going. The war was brought to a close by the disastrous Treaty of Adrianople.
I looked it up and the T was silent. She just
Okay.
said star. Oh,
Okay.
let me see if I can play it for you. See if this works. Can you hear it?
Czar, czar,
Yeah,
czar.
kind of cool.
Yeah.
So what is
Czar.
An emperor of Russia before 1917, or a person appointed by government to advise on and coordinate policy in a particular area.
So is that the same thing as what we know as the CZAR, czar? It's just a different,
Czar. Yeah. Sounds like it.
just a different spelling?
Maybe I'll have to look that up. CZAR.
Because I know that's what I run across a lot of times, and it's confusing for me. That's why I keep repeating who Muhammad Ali is and who Muhammad II is. because I kept getting lost in who's who, but they use, depending on, I don't know if it has to do with what country or whoever's talking about it, but they'll use different spellings for the same thing, and it gets confusing.
Yeah, so when I typed in CZAR, it came up with TSAR, and it says TSAR, Tsar, also spelled CZAR, or TZAR, or CSAR, is a title used to designate East and South Slavic monarchs or supreme rulers of Eastern Europe, originally the Bulgarian monarchs from 10th century onwards.
Okay,
So yeah, it's the same.
same thing. Okay, thank you. The war was brought to a close by the disastrous Treaty of Adrianople. While the reforms in question were mainly implemented to improve the military, the most notable development that arose out of these efforts was a series of schools teaching everything from math to medicine to train new officers. So that was the Russo-Turkish War, 1828 to 1829. And it was the Russian Empire supported by Greece and Greece against the Ottoman Empire. Okay, just to review the whole line now. You've got Muhammad Ali, the Pasha of Egypt, is ruler here. He gets his title as Pasha. He's put in after a series of other viceroys and leaders, this power vacuum that took place. Now he's going to set out to establish himself here. Muhammad II is the Sultan. He comes on as the Sultan in 1808 of the Ottoman Empire at that time. So it's these two that go through this whole line of history. At the request of Muhammad II, Pasha expels the Wahhabis from Hijaz, that's in the Mecca, Medina area, 1811 to 1813. And then Ibrahim, that's Muhammad Ali, the Pasha of Egypt's son, goes and defeats the Wahhabis in their own native land in Central Arabia, comes under the control of Egypt. And then from 1820 to 1821, the Pasha conquers North Sudan. He becomes the master of slave trade, African slave trade. 1821, the first Balkan country gains independence from the Ottoman Empire. 1822, at the request of Muhammad II as well, the Pasha suppresses the Cretan revolt. 1825, Ibrahim provokes European powers with his military success, which leads to 1827, the destruction of the Ottoman and the Egyptian fleet at the Battle of Navarino. And then because the European powers come in and support and help. 1826, Muhammad II abolishes the Janissary Corps. Did I say 1822? If I did, 1826, 1826. Sounds like I said 1822 in my head. So then we have 1828 to 1829, you have the Russo-Turkish War. And the Greek War of Independence, the dates on it go all the way to 32, and I think it had to do with, I think part of it was in 1829 here, but then an official writing, I don't remember what it was called, an alliance or it was back a few slides, I don't remember what it was called, but it ends in 1829, but I think there's an official something that happened here. We have to go back through the notes, but I want to keep going forward right now. So anyways, the Greek War of Independence you can find from 1821 to 1832, which you can see before that final settlement here, that there was, this was overlapping because 1831 is where we begin the Syrian War. So this is the invasion of Syria. Those are all events that took place while that Pasha of Egypt is working to establish himself, and each of those, and he's the king of the south. He's also a faction of of Islam. You also have the Sultan, who's over the entire Ottoman Empire, and some of you guys help me out understand this. That would be like a caliphate, correct? The Sultan would be like a caliphate, or wait a second, is a caliphate only related to an Islamic state? I was reading up on that last night. But an Islamic state is by the Sunnis. Is that correct?
Repeat the question.
Yeah, I'm thinking out loud probably too. What I was looking at last night, an Islamic State is made up of the radical Sunnis. Now I'm trying to remember why I even asked that question. Because we're going into the invasion of Syria. We're looking at the Ottoman Empire. You have the Sultan who's over the Ottoman Empire. One of his vassal states is Egypt, and the Pasha of Egypt is working to establish himself, and he supports and helps at the request of the Sultan in several things: the expelling of the Wahhabis, and he goes up and conquers part of North Sudan and winds up being master of the slave trade. So in all of his interactions and in helping, he's called upon again to help in the Greek War of Independence. In all of his helping, he's promised other territories to be over. What he wanted was Syria. He was promised Syria, and that's what kicks off this battle, is because then the Sultan is not going to give him Syria, and he goes, so the Pasha goes and fights against the Sultan to get Syria. So the First Egyptian-Ottoman War, First Turco-Egyptian War, or First Syrian War, 1831 to 33, was a military conflict between the Ottoman Empire and Egypt. Because you can see during that history, they're working together. The Pasha is helping at the request of the Sultan. But what he's seeking to do is establish himself. And he wanted Syria, that same piece of land that is always at the center of everything. He wants Syria, and he was promised Syria, but then the Sultan doesn't give it to him. So now he's going to go fight the Sultan. So you have two Islamic leaders that are going to fight each other. So let's see, was a military conflict between Ottoman Empire and Egypt brought about by Muhammad Ali Pasha's demand to the Sublime Porte for control of Greater Syria as a reward for aiding the Sultan during the Greek War of Independence. As a result, Muhammad Ali's forces temporarily gained control of Syria, advancing as far north as Kutaya. So you've got the First Egyptian War, which was 1831 to 1833. We see a 6-year break. And this war, we're going to work on at another date. We're not going there yet. We're just going to stay on this one for now in modern day Syria. What time is it? 7:30, okay. Any comments or questions? Are we gathering some of the history, retaining a few pieces of it?
Yep.
Okay. So Muhammad Ali Pasha is recorded as planning to extend his rule to the Ottoman Empire's Syrian provinces as early as 1812, secretly telling the British consul of his designs on the territory that year. This desire was left on hold, however, as he consolidated his rule over Egypt, modernizing its government, administration, public services, and armed forces, and suppressing various rebellions, including Mamluk and Wahhabi uprisings on behalf of Sultan Muhammad II. So as early as 1812, he wanted Syria as his own, but he was busy establishing his own government and modernizing the government, and also busy doing the deeds of Muhammad II, the Sultan. So May 1798, where you have the French expedition, Napoleon goes to Egypt. June 25th, 1802, the Treaty of Paris is a re-securing, and I know that's not spelled right because it kept coming up underlined, but I tried it many different ways, but it's re-securing Egypt for the Ottomans. 1811 to 1818, Wahhabi War or Ottoman Saudi War, and that was the Wahhabi War. Let's see. Hang on one second, let me move my phone away. There we go. I finally learned how to shut off the ring. So the Wahhabi War or Ottoman Saudi War was fought from early 1811 to 1818 between Egypt Islet under the reign of Muhammad Ali Pasha, normally under Ottoman rule, and the army of the Emirate of Diriyah, the first Saudi state, resulting in the destruction of the latter. So, I'm gonna go outside. Go out there. Okay, so then we have 1821 to 1832, the Greek War of Independence. You've got the Battle of Navarino here. This is Ibrahim, the Pasha's son, that winds up with a big defeat here, but then that's what draws the attention of the European powers to come in and suppress that and destroy the Egyptian Ottoman fleet. So then this all leads up to the First Egyptian-Ottoman War, 1831 to 1833, this 2-year period here. And then you have a 6-year period of break, and then you're going to have the Second Egyptian-Ottoman War. In the middle of this is August 11th, 1840. And the Mameluke, I guess I didn't have that. Yeah, the Mameluke and Wahhabi. The Mameluke again here is a term most commonly referring either to non-Muslim slave soldiers, freed slaves, Muslim converts assigned to military and administrative duties, and Muslim rulers of slave origin. The governor of Acre, Abdullah Pasha Ibn Ali, was harboring fugitives of the Egyptian draft and was said to have refused a request to contribute towards Muhammad Ali's war effort. So Acre, I don't have a map on this one right here either, but if you were to picture Egypt and then going up to Syria, up the coast up to Syria, Acre is actually where the whirlwind comes and pushes Napoleon back. So there was about 4 battles, I think, before they got to Acre, and that's where there was a 60-day battle, and the Ottomans defeated Napoleon, and Napoleon returned to Egypt. So if you picture that, and we'll have some maps going on, I just don't have one on this particular slide. So the governor there was harboring fugitives of the Egyptian draft and was said to have refused a request to contribute towards Muhammad Ali's war effort. So he's wanting to go into Syria, and this governor of Acre is refusing to help him, and he's harboring fugitives of the draft. With these insults as pretext, land and sea forces under the command of Ibrahim Pasha, that's the Pasha of Egypt's son, were sent north to besiege Acre in October 1831. The city fell to Ibrahim's army 6 months later in May 1832. After Acre, he continued on to win control of Aleppo, Homs, Beirut, Sidon, Tripoli, and Damascus. The armies sent by the Sultan and various local governors were unable to check Ibrahim's forces. So this is Egypt trying to take Syria. The then ongoing Tanzimat reforms of Muhammad II had experienced significant difficulties in adopting the innovative military methods of conscription, which is a draft, and mass drill, then being implemented in European armies. But Muhammad Ali, which is the Sultan, had managed to adopt both. This is goes by different names, so it gets confusing, but this is Muhammad Ali, the Pasha, okay, had managed to adopt both. Ibrahim's overwhelming success cannot be attributed only to modern organization, however. His officers had significantly more experience than their Ottoman counterparts, having borne the brunt of fighting in the empire's 2 most recent major wars against the Wahhabi and Greek rebellions, and he attracted significant local support to his cause by calling his campaign one for liberation from the Turkish yoke. With the provinces of Greater Syria under his control, the Egyptian army continued their campaign into Anatolia in late 1832. So remember that he expelled the Janissaries, which was 1826, I think it was, or 1827. He expelled them, and he was modernizing his army. And he struggles to work with the methods of conscription. It's a draft army and mass drill. And so if I'm understanding that correctly, he has some weakness on his side, which seems to give the Pasha of Egypt the upper hand. The Battle of Konya. On 21st November 1832, the Egyptian forces occupied the city of Konya in central Anatolia, within striking distance of the imperial capital of Constantinople. The Sultan organized a new army of 80,000 men under Rashid Mohammed Pasha, the Grand Vizier, in a last-ditch attempt to block Ibrahim's advance towards the capital. While Ibrahim commanded a force of 50,000 men, most of them were spread out along his supply lines from Cairo, and he had only 15,000 in Konya. So Cairo to going up towards Constantinople, great difference of space there. So most of his army's not with him. Nevertheless, when the armies met on December 21st, Ibrahim's forces won in a rout, capturing the Grand Vizier after he became lost in fog, attempting to rally the collapsing left flank of his forces. The Egyptians suffered only 792 casualties compared to the Ottoman army's 3,000 dead, and they captured 46 of the 100 guns with which the army had left Istanbul. The stunning victory at Konya would be the final and most impressive victory of the Egyptian campaign against the Sublime Porte, and would represent a high point of Muhammad Ali's power in the region. So he's gained Syria, gone all the way up to the almost into Constantinople, within striking distance. And he went in there with his son with 15,000 soldiers, if I'm following that correctly, against 80,000 men of the Sultan's new organized army. So the aftermath. Though no military forces remained between Ibrahim's army and Istanbul, severe winter weather forced him to make camp at Konya long enough for the Sublime Porte to conclude an alliance with Russia and for Russian forces to arrive in Anatolia, blocking his route to the capital. The arrival of a European power would prove to be too great a challenge for Ibrahim's army to overcome. Wary of Moscow's expanding influence in the Ottoman Empire and its potential to upset the balance of power, French and British pressure forced Muhammad Ali and Ibrahim to agree to the Convention of Cutaya. Under the settlement, the Syrian provinces were ceded to Egypt, and Ibrahim Pasha was made the governor general of the region. So, battle between the king of the north and the king of the south over Syria, and the king of the south has Syria. That's probably something significant to put on our line, that he's got Syria in his hand, the king of the south. And keeping in mind when we go forward that the king of the north and the king of the south, the United States and Russia, it's a proxy war. They're both Islam by proxy. The treaty left Muhammad Ali a nominal vassal of the Sultan. 6 years later, when Muhammad Ali moved to declare de jure independence, the Sultan declared him a traitor and sent an army to confront Ibrahim Pasha, launching the Second Ottoman War. So this leaves, makes him, the king of the south, more powerful and less of a vassal, nominal vassal to the Sultan. And then 6 years later, you come to this battle here when Muhammad Ali wants to be completely independent from the Ottoman Empire. The Sultan declares him a traitor, and it's this second Egyptian war here, Egyptian-Ottoman war here, that is in the Josiah Litch document in the history of Revelation 9 and the ending of the second woe, and also the history of Daniel 11, 40, as we go through this as well. Okay.
Wasn't Egypt in that time subject to the Ottoman Empire, to the Sultan?
Yes, and that's what he was fighting for, was to be independent of.
Right.
Yeah. By the time you get to 1939 to 40, won. That's what he's fighting for, is to be completely independent.
Right.
And he has had a victory where he now controls Syria. And that is the first part of the war. So if we were to line up on our line, which I don't have that yet, I'm still trying to weed through all the history, and I'm sorry for having to give so much of the history because it's really a lot of weaving through and I only have so much time. So some of it we're kind of going through together. But in the First Syrian War, if I'm following correctly, this win for the King of the South, King of the North, we should be able to see some of that 2011 to 2013 by compare and contrast. Okay, so here's a map for us. I knew I had one in here eventually. So you got Syria up here, and this is where I was saying where the Napoleon expedition, where he comes down in here, Alexandria, he takes Cairo, he goes and does his expedition to see the Canal of the Pharaohs in here, and then he starts to proceed up to go into Syria, to go up and he wants to continue and go up and conquer in the Ottoman Empire. However, he gets pushed back at Acre, which is around here somewhere, I think it was, because there was about four battles before he got to Acre, where the whirlwind comes after him and pushes him. The whirlwind takes him, he's defeated, he goes back to Egypt, and then he goes back to France. And then after that, you've got this power vacuum left here in Egypt, where there's several different leaders put in place. And I don't know what the connection is with the Albanians, but I think if I remember right, it was the Albanians that were made viceroy, and that the Muhammad Ali Pasha was from Albania, if I remember correctly. And anyway, so he winds up a vassal basically for, and this is not your Ottoman Empire map that we're looking at, but he becomes a vassal for the Sultan that's over the Ottoman Empire. Okay, so so the vassal here, Muhammad Ali, while he's working to establish himself, he goes and at the request of the Sultan, goes down here to expel the Wahhabis from the Hijaz, can't remember what it said now, but that they were down here because of having the Wahhabis, which were puritanical, it said, or what we might look modern day, total radical religionists. And it was an embarrassment to the Sultan to have them here. So at the request of the Sultan, the Pasha goes down here and expels them. Then 2 years, I think it was later, his son goes and takes them out of their homeland. It destroys them out of their homeland, which was in here, Nijad, I think is what it was called. It's not named that on this map. But then the Pasha of Egypt goes up the Nile River and has a great defeat and takes part of northern Sudan. And that makes him then master of the slave trade, with the slaves being taken off to Europe and America, Caribbean and Europe. I think you read Europe, Caribbean. Okay, so, and remember that Napoleon's purpose for his expedition was wanting to go and do this exploration and try to see about having a way to come down through Egypt, through the Nile, through the Suez Canal, and check out the Canal of the Pharaohs that was dug there. This is pre-Suez Canal, that they could find a way to come through, that they could cut off trade from the British to India. So rather than going down, and I don't have this whole big map here, but all the way down the west coast of Africa, down and around and back up to Egypt, then they could just come down through here, and he could be master of the Mediterranean down through here, under Saudi Arabia and around and over to Egypt, which is also not on the screen. Okay, so that's just a quick review of that portion of it. So now, as more currently, at least at the time of the beginning of the Syrian War, because I think some of these, I think Turkey, maybe somebody knows, seemed like Turkey wound up on the side with Russia. And maybe somebody knows that answer. But at the time of the beginning, those that were against Assad was Qatar, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, the United States, and the EU and the Arab League. And we'll read the details on each of these as we go through. Syria's allies were Iran, Russia, and then also China comes in. So you've got the Iran, this battle between Iran and Saudi Arabia. And you've got the Syrian Civil War going on. You've got the Shias and the Sunnis. And if I understand correctly from what I've been understanding is that there are Shias here and there are Sunnis here. In Iran wanted to activate the Shias here to revolt against Saudi Arabia. So that's part of their battle too. So it becomes a battle between the Sunnis and the Shias. So how did it, some of this is going to be semi-duplicated just because I merged a couple of different websites. One of them is this BBC link. You could look at all of it. I don't know if I don't think I have all of it in here. And I think this is the one I was working on and haven't finished. And then there's also the article that I sent out, the Syrian Civil War. I think I sent that article out, the entire article from the Britannica. So even before the conflict began, many Syrians were complaining about high unemployment, corruption, and a lack of political freedom under President Bashar al-Assad, who succeeded his father, Hafez, after he died in 2000. In March 2001, pro-democracy demonstrations erupted in the southern city of Deira, inspired by the Arab Spring in neighboring countries. So that was the reference that I was going back, that I mentioned earlier, that the Greek Revolution. Maybe somebody else remembers better than me, but we just read it. But the Greek revolutions, I think it was, there was the revolutionary spirit that was going on. After the French Revolution, there became this revolutionary spirit. And so the Greek, I think it was the Greek War of Independence was brought from that same spirit. So you have, prior to the Syrian War, you've got Arab Spring, which is this spirit of revolution and democracy, in freedom, trying to fight against these oppressive nations. So it's inspired by Arab Spring neighboring countries. And that was Tunisia and Egypt, the two main ones that were mentioned. When the government used deadly force to crush the dissent, protests demanding the president's resignation erupted nationwide. The unrest spread and the crackdown intensified. Opposition supporters took up arms, first to defend themselves and later to rid their areas of security forces. Mr. Assad vowed to crush what he called foreign-backed terrorism. The violence rapidly escalated and the country descended into civil war. It was in the impoverished, drought-stricken rural province of in southern Syria that the first major protests occurred in March 2001. A group of children, there's a video you can watch too, I don't remember what it was called, you can probably Google on YouTube, who started, I think it's Who Started the Syrian War, and you'll find a video that went through that really well. A group of children had been arrested and tortured by the authorities for writing anti-regime graffiti. Incensed local people took to the street to demonstrate for political and economic reforms. Security forces responded harshly, conducting mass arrests and sometimes firing on the demonstrators. The violence of the regime's response added visibility and momentum to the protesters' cause, and within weeks, similar nonviolent protests had begun to appear in cities around the country. Videos of security forces beating and firing at protesters captured by witnesses on mobile phones were circulated around the country and smuggled out to foreign media outlets. Sound familiar? With all the protests,
Totally.
huh?
Yeah, it totally sounds familiar.
Yeah, with all the protesting that's going on, it's and you'll see and hear that he does the same thing, saying that the protesters are the ones causing the problems, they're the violent ones and all. So it's kind of interesting to read that. But this is the beginning of the
Sister Mariani asked, what was the name of that video again?
I think it was called Who Started the Syrian War. That would probably help you find it, and I'll try to remember to look for it again. But it showed it. I think it was the actual young man that was a boy at the time, that they were just writing anti-regime graffiti, and they were arrested and tortured, him and his friends, and they were arrested and tortured. And then this, oh shoot, sorry. We're gonna have to see if I can pull that back up. There we go. We had a cat on the keyboard, sorry. So it was the story of the boy that was writing, that was him and his friends were arrested, and that's what kicked off the violence against these protesters, or kicked off protesting, and then they began, Assad's regime was literally shooting at the protesters. And that began to escalate it. And they were using, I thought it was really interesting because when it comes to information war and the internet and Facebook and all of that, that's what was used a great deal to get their information out to others. They were using social media to call about protests, to bring about protests. It's just really interesting though. You have all the same, so it's like all the same stuff is really set in place to be having the same circumstances in all these different places. Okay, so what is the war about? It is now more than a battle between those who are for or against Mr. Assad. Many groups and countries, each with their own agendas, so it's not just the Syrian Civil War, it's many groups and countries, each with their own agenda, are involved, making the situation far more complex and prolonging the fighting. They've been accused of fostering hatred between Syria's religious groups, pitching the Sunni Muslim majority against the president's Shia Alawite sect. Such divisions have led both sides to commit atrocities, torn communities apart, and dimmed hopes of peace. They've also allowed the jihadist group Islamic State and Al-Qaeda to flourish. Syria kind of seems like just everybody jumped in. If I'm understanding correctly, everybody jumped in with all their own agenda. So they were accused of fostering hatred between Syria's religious groups, pitching the Sunni Muslim majority against the president's Shia Alawite sect. They've also allowed the jihadist groups of Islamic State and Al-Qaeda to flourish. Syria's Kurds, who want the right of self-government but have not fought Mr. Assad's forces, have added another dimension to the conflict. So who's involved? The government's key supporters, I'm gonna check the time real quick. The government's key supporters have been Russia and Iran, while Turkey, Western powers, and several Gulf Arab states have backed the opposition. Russia, which already had military bases in Syria, launched an air campaign in support of Mr. Assad in 2015 that has been crucial in turning the tide of the war in the government's favor. The Russian military says it strikes only target terrorists, but activists say they regularly kill mainstream rebels and civilians. Iran is believed to have deployed hundreds of troops and spent billions of dollars to help Mr. Assad. Thousands of Shia Muslim militiamen, armed, trained, and financed by Iran, mostly from Lebanon's Hezbollah movement, but also Iraq, Afghanistan, and Yemen, have also fought alongside the Syrian army. The US, UK, and France initially provided support for what they considered moderate rebel groups, but they have prioritized non-lethal assistance since jihadists became the dominant force in the armed opposition. A US-led global coalition has also carried out airstrikes on the Islamic State militants in Syria since 2014 and helped an alliance of Kurdish and Arab militias called the Syrian Democratic Forces capture territory once held by the jihadists in the east. And 2014 is the year that al-Baghdadi, I don't know how you say it, declared himself caliphate, an Islamic State, the Islamic State of Iran and Iraq, I think it is. We'll see that as we go forward. Turkey has long supported the rebels, but it is focused on using them to contain the Kurdish militia that dominates the Syrian Defense Forces, accusing it of being an extension of a banned Kurdish rebel group in Turkey. Turkish-backed rebels have controlled territory along the border in northwestern Syria since 2016. Saudi Arabia, which is keen to counter Iranian influence, has armed and financed the rebels as the kingdom's Gulf rival, Qatar. Israel, meanwhile, has been so concerned by what it calls Iran's military entrenchment in Syria and shipments of Iranian weapons to Hezbollah that it has conducted hundreds of airstrikes in an attempt to thwart them. So I think it's 8 o'clock. I don't know if you want to quit here and we'll do a review when we start on Friday again and pick up where we leave off.
How many more pages do you have?
I don't remember. I can back out of here.
I think it's 39.
What'd you say?
Yeah, it goes to 39. So what page were you on?
28.
So there's another 11 pages.
Yeah, we got quite a ways to go. And actually, I'm starting to build the next line. So it's probably an okay spot to stop. And we'll pick up, we'll kind of review that section, review Napoleon again, and just do a quick review of it, and then pick up on it. And prayerfully, because I don't have a lot more in here, I want to be able to pick up and start adding some of the, adding also in some of the information prior to the Syrian War as well. So we were on page 28, and I think it would take us, it'd take us quite a while if we tried to finish it. So I think we'll quit it there, and then we'll just review it Friday and pick up here. Any questions or comments besides, wow, that was a lot of information?
Nope, that just sums it up.
And you have the notes to go back and review it.
Right.
We just need to get the main idea of what's happening.
Mhm.
And remembering that it was in 1798, it was two different, they were all Islam and all Muslim, but this power struggle between Egypt and being a vassal of the Ottoman Empire, and this power struggle, they had the Mamelukes there, which was a radical form of Islam that were then eventually expelled. And so picking up the key points, trying to pick up and follow the key points, looking at the spirit of the revolutionary spirit that carries through, that leads to the Greek War of Independence. It's all the breaking up of this, of the Ottoman Empire. And so if we can keep all that in our minds as we then go look and throughout the week, some of the documents that I emailed, if you have a chance, some of them were really worthwhile reading, showing, because we know that when we get to 2021, that's when the King of the South receives a deadly wound, and his deadly wound is that he loses his spheres of influence. And my understanding is that's a restraint of Islam. So, and I'm still trying to work on that, because we see the restraint of Islam 2020, and I don't understand yet 2021, other than the deadly wound. The other thing to focus on, so those articles, a few of them will tell you some of the details of, like when Putin I don't, maybe somebody has this more correctly than what I do, but Putin, I don't know if he became a full member of OPEC, but he works with OPEC. I was trying to find that out because there were some sites that I read that seemed to suggest he wasn't full on part of OPEC or a member of OPEC, but he works in cooperation with them. So then you have, you can see in some of those documents how he seems to be playing the Crown Prince and also playing Trump at the same time. They're all three seem to be playing each other for what they want, for their own purposes. But Putin, it shows, kind of bit off more than he can chew. And then with COVID-19, when that came in, and he was supposed to reduce his oil drilling, how many barrels per day, that he doesn't have the equipment, and I think we went over that on Sabbath. He doesn't have the equipment that allows him to just shut off the tap and then restart. And so he's basically been deceitful and continuing to drill and not reduce his amount, but all of what he's doing seems to be pinching him as well financially. So there's a lot to learn here. Not a member. I can find this in the chat. Okay. He's not a member of the Organization of Petroleum Exporting, but is a key fellow exporter and typically an ally to the group. Yeah, so he's supposed to be working with them. So he's not a member, but he's supposed to be working with them to where their purpose is to control the price of oil. Thank you for putting that in the chat. So some of those documents had a lot of good pieces of information that need to be pulled out. If anybody has time to read them. I've read them, but I haven't gone through them when I'm actually trying to put together the notes. So I have to go back through them myself too. So any other comments?
The second part that I put in there, I also got on by Googling, but it says that they have managed to obtain for themselves a practical veto power over OPEC. So they have a lot of power over it, even though they're not a member, which is odd.
Yeah, I think in some of the documents that I sent, there might be information on that.
Yeah.
And you did put that video in there. Thank you. The boy who started the Syrian War.
You're welcome.
That was pretty interesting too.
I was watching the ones, bitter enemies.
Yeah, bitter rivals.
Bitter rival. Yeah, those were very beneficial.
Yeah,
you have to watch them a few times to get all the names down.
same here. That's why I say, because they're all there's a lot of similar names that go on too, and it's hard to follow who's who. But one thing I thought was interesting, and I can't remember his name, but the foreign minister of Saudi Arabia, when he's talking to the reporter, the journalist, and he's talking about the, and I don't remember the specific, it was the what went on 30 years ago. I think it was the, I want to say it was the Iranian Revolution, I don't remember, but anyways, he's talking about what they did and who's to blame and who's this and who's that. And he said that in hindsight, you know, they could have done it different. And the journalist says, well, it's good to hear if a lot of people want to hear you say that you're sorry for what happened. He goes, well, of course, that's how you do it. You do what you do at the time. And so I thought it was really interesting. What I kind of got out of there is they do what is best at the time, but they don't think from cause to effect. And because we've been learning a lot about cause and effect, so they don't think about the effect of what they're going to do does and what it actually leads to. So I thought that was interesting.
Is that really calm guy that?
Yes.
Yeah, that was interesting.
Yeah, and you see him in a clip where he's younger a long time ago, but he's just in a suit and a tie. I recognize the face and the way he talked. And yeah, it was interesting watching that, and also the Crown Prince one. There's been a couple of others that I've been watching. I'm trying to get to know these people because it's totally outside my realm of understanding, but I'm trying to get to know, who each of these are in all these different factions. But what it was talking about with the Syrian War is, all these other people wound up getting involved with all their own agenda. And if you pull back the telescope, the agenda of the King of the North and the King of the South is to have control of the Middle East and the oil. So, and Russia, or I want to say Soviet Union, I think it was pre-1989, was already trying to work their way into, because it was 79 to 89 was the Afghanistan war, but prior to that as well, they were already trying to work their way in there to try to get at the United States. So there's a lot to understand. What quote was Sister Marioni looking for?
Is it the two for the OPEC? I just Googled it, and that's what Google brought back. Oh, okay. So one of them is from Forbes magazine. It's like a quote out of Forbes magazine. And then the other one is from www.dw.com. I'll put those links in there.
And some of that information you'll find in, I think one of the documents I sent is on his involvement with OPEC, and where he was supposed to reduce the number of barrels per day, and he didn't, and he's lying. So there was a pretty big back and forth going on in there that was pretty helpful. So if we look at it from pulling back the telescope and try to look at it from the King of the North, the King of the South, the other thing we need to also understand, and I've been trying to go back and read, is the actual Battle of Panium in Daniel 11, verse 14, right? And trying to understand, because we need to look at that battle, because that battle also is going to tell us about this battle between the King of the North and the King of the South.
Battle of Panium.
What? Can you say something, Jackie?
Yeah, I did write some of the history of the wars. Yeah, that's interesting on Panium too. I'm putting this down, just writing out lines. Tess mentioned this. She said, write the lines out. And this is fairly new. This is new for us. How many actual wars, starting with the French Revolution with Bonaparte, how many wars were we looking at here? We didn't, of course, we did French Revolution on Sabbath, I think, didn't we? And there's so much information here. Details in this history that go year by year. So I don't know if you've counted these wars, how many there are, but just because I'm writing out the lines, I see that, we started with the French Revolution, and then we went into, see if I can come up with this, the first Egyptian Ottoman War, but that was later. And then we had the Greek War of Independence. That line shows 1798. And that goes through 1841. And then we have the Battle of Konya. As I was writing this down off your notes as well. And then we had the Greek War of Independence, which is 1821 through 1832. So, so is that what we're including in kind of what you went through tonight, or what you went through tonight?
Well, what I'm going through is we know that this is, if I understood it correctly, and as I've been kind of studying it, because our understanding of Daniel 11:40 has always been about the papacy. The United States being the military strength of the papacy, and understanding that the Soviet Union then became Russia. We understood the death and resurrection, so we understood that Russia would be resurrected. But this is as if I remember right, the way I'm pretty sure I heard Elder Parminder say it this way, which as I'm studying, I kind of see it this way now. It's like another line of history. It's the line looking at the actual, because there's significant points that he's made when it comes to Uriah Smith and also Josiah Litch, where Josiah Litch makes the point and then Uriah Smith copies it by titling chapter 11 in his book, Daniel in the Revelation in Daniel chapter 11, that it's a literal prophecy. So we've been told in advance and basically put together a structure where we've created out of a structure a separate time of the end, but it's a literal prophecy. So we're looking at the literal history, and it's another line, but it's a line that should, if I'm understanding what I've been studying, it should help us to understand the increase, lead us to the increase of knowledge on Islam, because we know that at this time, prior to this time, Josiah Litch wrote that document to the clergy initially, and it was pre-August 11th, 1840. But when he had understood that sometime in 1840 that the Ottoman Empire would fall, and then when it came down to the 10 days before and he makes the prediction of August 11th, then it actually happens, then his document goes to the clergy. So he wrote it to the clergy, especially to the clergy, and then it went to the public. So, and it confirmed the fulfillment of it, confirmed the methodology of a day-year principle. You saw the restraint of Islam. It was also an election year. And I know there was another thing. Oh, there was an impetus given to the work. So there's going to be an increase of light. This should lead us to the movement. And that's what we need to be praying for, the whole movement, that the Lord would open up the increase of knowledge on Islam, that we would have understanding of it, if it be his will for us to understand it. I mean, this is his movement. This is his prophet, however you want to say it. We have a prophet among us, that you've got the false prophet that is making a prediction. Internally, you have a false prophet that's making a prediction of a nuclear strike on this Nashville by Islam. And so there should be an increase of light on Islam for us to have understanding that the methodology then is going to be proved and an impetus is given to the work. This all will lead to, at Panium 2021, the deadly wound of the King of the South, where he loses his spheres of influence. If I understand correctly, he loses his spheres of influence gradually. Some of those documents that I sent seems to show where he's made some missteps in getting involved in what it seems to be is he's trying to get the Crown Prince away from the United States and with him. But that's what I got out of some of that. And so he's been working to try to get the United States pushed out of the way and the Crown Prince on his side, which is interesting. So, and then looking at the actual history, I mean, in Daniel 11:14, the actual Daniel 8:14, the Battle of Panium, I was re-looking at it, but I'm still very vague on it, but that was when you had the infant king. And Rome comes in and helps the infant king. And that kind of threw me off because I was trying to figure that out, because Rome comes in and helps the infant king, and the infant king is the king of the South. So we need to look at that battle too. So a lot. So we need to pray. So maybe
Wow, yes, thank you so much for the summary. Yeah, of where we're headed here. And it's all prophetic
and all we've done is
from
gone through
Daniel.
history. That's all we've done is gone through history with a few thoughts on possible, looking at some possible applications. But I think it seems pretty solid to say that the king of the north and the king of the south by proxy are Islam, different factions of Islam, just like you had Egypt and Syria in 1798. So, Sister Jackie, would you like to close us in prayer?
Yes, I will. All of everyone's ministry, which is really helping us all as we share. So go ahead and pray. Thank you. Our dear, kind, loving Father in heaven, we thank you for our time tonight, especially for this important study. There's so much to it, but we know it's all leading up to Anium and 2021 through the lines you're showing us, Father, just what to expect and where we should be with all of our heart and minds. And we thank you that you see exactly what each of us needed this time to really be able to push this truth forward and to move your arm in righteousness. We need to really understand and know where we stand on the lines. Thank you for giving us wisdom. Thank you for Sister Elaine's ministry in her studies and what she has given to us. This comes from you, and that we will do our part to study this truth, this message, because we know that you have the Levites and the Nephilims to reach, and we want to be ready for this. We see how you're working to correct our wrong understanding. No matter what time and when we've come into this message, we know that we have still much to learn. And we ask that you humble our hearts and keep us ever moving forward, trusting you, because we know we can do nothing without you. So thank you, Father, for all living us, and that we certainly will do our part under the Holy Spirit's guiding each one of us, and that we can really prepare and be ready and help one another wherever we can. So we thank you for this. Thank you for hearing our prayers. Thank you for answering our prayers, for the blessing of this time that we live in to reach the people in this world of crisis right now. So be with each one that's suffering. Keep your hand upon those that are in heart looking to you. And we thank you for how you've led us in the past. So be with us until we meet again on Friday night. And again, we thank you for every blessing you give us. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Yeah.